Hey everyone, Elliot Voss is here. Let's jump into the story. I got to the restaurant 40 minutes early because I wanted to surprise my wife. That was the whole plan. Rachel thought I was stuck at school in some department meeting. In reality, I was parked across the street with a lemon tart from the little bakery she'd mentioned almost 3 months earlier. I'd hidden the white box on the passenger seat because I wanted to act like I'd forgotten dessert, then pull it out after dinner like I'd just remembered. It wasn't exactly a brilliant romantic move, but after 15 years of marriage, you figure out that remembering someone's favorite dessert means a lot more than buying flowers that'll be dead by the weekend. I locked my truck, looked up, and saw Rachel through the front window. She wasn't supposed to be there yet, and she definitely wasn't supposed to be there with another man. I recognized him before I even stepped off the curb. Daniel Mercer, Vice President of Marketing, Rachel's boss. I'd only met him once at her company's Christmas party. He spent the entire evening drifting from table to table, remembering everybody's name, shaking hands, somehow making every conversation feel like it was the only one that mattered. When he met me, he'd smiled and said, "History teacher, Rachel tells us you're the patient one." I'd laughed. I teach sophomores. Patient's a relative term. He laughed harder than the joke deserved. That was Daniel. Everything about him seemed dialed up about 20%. Now he was sitting across from my wife in the same restaurant we'd picked for our anniversary. I stopped walking. Their table was close enough to the window that I could see them clearly, even if I couldn't hear a word. Rachel was laughing, not the polite kind. She was really laughing. Daniel slid a gray folder across the table. She opened it, flipped through a few pages, then reached across the table. From where I was standing, her hand disappeared behind a water glass. I couldn't tell if she'd touched his hand or just pushed the folder back. That tiny blind spot would stay with me for months. A server came over with the check. Daniel signed it. Rachel picked up the folder. They both stood. He gave her a quick, one-armed hug. Professional, brief. The kind of hug people give after wrapping up a meeting. Then something happened that completely threw me. They didn't leave together. Daniel walked toward the hotel next door. Rachel headed for the parking garage. Separate cars, separate directions. I should have just walked inside. If I had, the whole story probably would have ended right there. Instead, I stood on the sidewalk until Rachel drove away. About a minute later, I called her. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, you still at work?" "Just finishing up." She sounded tired. "I'll head out in a minute." I looked across the street at the restaurant she'd just walked out of. "Traffic looks pretty bad." She gave a quiet laugh. "When doesn't it?" "I might be 10 minutes late." "No problem. I'll meet you there." "Sounds good." She hung up. I stood there with my phone still in my hand. She hadn't mentioned dinner, hadn't mentioned Daniel, hadn't mentioned the restaurant. Nothing. I told myself there had to be a reason. People forget things. Business dinners happen. Managers pick up the check. None of that meant anything on its own still. It felt strange. By the time I walked into the restaurant, she'd already been seated at a different table. She smiled the second she saw me. "There you are." "I made it." "I was starting to think your principal kidnapped you." "He threatened to." She laughed. "There he is." The next hour felt completely normal. We ordered way too much food. Rachel stole fries off my plate after insisting she wasn't hungry. I told her about one of my students who wrote an entire essay arguing the American Revolution would have turned out differently if George Washington had drones. She laughed so hard she almost dropped her fork. Then she told me about work, or at least part of it. "The product launch is getting intense." "You surviving?" "Barely." She smiled. "I think I've answered 400 emails today." "You should just start replying with thumbs up emojis." "I'd be unemployed by Friday." That sounded exactly like Rachel. Dry. Funny. Comfortable. kept waiting for her to bring up seeing Daniel. Nothing. Not while we talked about work. Not when dessert came. Not on the drive home. When we pulled into the driveway, she leaned her head back and closed her eyes. I really needed tonight. I'm glad. Things have been crazy since the promotion. I know. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Thanks for being patient. I looked at her. She meant it. I could tell. So why hadn't she mentioned she'd already been there? I didn't ask. Not because I was afraid of the answer. Because I was afraid I'd sound ridiculous. Hey, I happened to see you through a restaurant window. Even in my own head, it sounded crazy. So I let it go. Or at least I thought I did. 3 nights later, Rachel left her phone on the kitchen island while she carried a basket of laundry upstairs. A second later, it buzzed. The screen lit up. Daniel Mercer. Need you tomorrow morning. Don't let finance corner you again. That was it. Nothing romantic, nothing secret. Just work. I looked away before the screen went dark. Rachel came back downstairs with a stack of towels tucked under one arm. My phone buzz? Yeah. She picked it up. Daniel. I waited. Board meeting tomorrow. She slipped the phone into her pocket. I'll deal with it in the morning. That could have been the end of it. Instead, she smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and disappeared into the laundry room. For some reason, I stood there watching her go. Then I thought about that gray folder again. A second later, something else hit me. When Daniel paid the bill, Rachel never even reached for her purse. Maybe the company reimbursed business dinners. Maybe he paid because he was her boss. Both of those explanations made perfect sense. So why couldn't I stop thinking about it? I carried the lemon tart box out to the garage and tossed it into the recycling bin. I'd completely forgotten to give it to her. Standing there beside the bin, I caught myself replaying those few minutes outside the restaurant. Not the hug, not the check. Just that one moment when Rachel reached across the table. The harder I tried to remember, the less certain I became about what I'd actually seen. The strange thing about suspicion is that it doesn't hit you all at once. It settles in. Quietly. One question turns into a habit. A habit turns into the way you see everything. Before you know it, you're looking at the same person you've loved for 15 years and wondering if you've somehow been reading them wrong all this time. For the first couple of weeks, I did a pretty good job convincing myself I was being ridiculous. Rachel's promotion had changed everything. Before she managed marketing campaigns, now she managed people who managed campaigns. That meant executive meetings, budget reviews, client dinners, and a calendar that looked like somebody dumped a bottle of ink all over it. She wasn't hiding how busy she was. If anything, she complained about it nonstop. They scheduled 3 meetings just to prepare for another meeting, she said one night as she kicked off her heels. I'm starting to think corporate America is just people making calendars for other people's calendars. I laughed. You should have been a history teacher. You couldn't pay me enough. You literally make more than I do. Exactly. That was us. Easy. Comfortable. Easy. The only thing that had changed was what came after the jokes. Rachel used to come home with stories. Nothing confidential. Just the funny little things. Somebody forgetting to mute themselves on Zoom. Someone microwaving fish in the break room. The guy who accidentally emailed the client a rough draft instead of the finished presentation. Those stories slowly disappeared. Now every conversation ended the same way. It was just work. I understood why. At least I thought I did. Confidential projects, executive meetings, non-disclosure agreements. All of it sounded reasonable. Still, her entire workday had somehow turned into a blank space. One Saturday, her company hosted a spring barbecue for employees and their families. Rachel almost didn't go. I've already spent 60 hours with these people this week. So we'll stay an hour. 45 minutes. Deal. The event was at a local park. Nothing fancy. A rented pavilion. Burgers on the grill, kids throwing footballs around. Exactly the kind of company picnic everybody's been to at least once. I'd barely grabbed a soda before Daniel spotted us. There she is. He walked over with that same endless energy I remembered from Christmas. Ethan! He shook my hand like we'd never met before. You survive another school year? Barely. He laughed. I hear that from Rachel every Monday. Rachel smiled. I don't say barely. No, Daniel said. You use longer words. He turned back to her. I need you Tuesday morning. I know. We're moving the finance review. I saw the invite. Good. Then, without thinking twice, he gave her one of those quick side hugs. Exactly like the one I'd seen through the restaurant window. He stepped away immediately, already talking to somebody else. Hey, Steve, your twins ever win that soccer tournament? And just like that, he was gone. I looked over at Rachel. She rolled her eyes. What? He hugs everybody. I noticed. It's annoying. You've told him? Twice. What did he say? She laughed. That he's a people person. That's not really an answer. I know. A few minutes later, we were waiting in line for burgers when Daniel walked by again. This time he wasn't talking to Rachel. He was talking to an older guy in a suit I'd never met. I don't care if legal hates it, Daniel said. If we wait another month, we'll lose her. The older man lowered his voice. I said we're working on it. Daniel noticed Rachel listening. He smiled. Ignore me. Grown-up problems. Rachel shrugged. I've already got enough of my own. He pointed a pair of barbecue tongs at her. Monday, 8 sharp. She gave him a sarcastic salute. Yes, sir. He laughed and kept walking. I watched him disappear into the crowd. Rachel nudged my arm. See? What? He talks to everybody like that. She was right. During the next half hour, I watched Daniel bounce from one conversation to another. Handshakes, backslaps, nicknames, quick hugs. He remembered spouses' names, kids' birthdays, somebody's golden retriever. He really was good at making people feel like they mattered. I also noticed something else. He stood just a little too close to everyone. Not just Rachel, everyone. There was something about him that ignored invisible boundaries. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic. Just enough to make you notice. On the drive home, I finally said it. He's different than I expected. Rachel glanced over. In a good way or a bad way? I honestly don't know, she laughed. Welcome to working with Daniel. What does that mean? Half the company thinks he's the best boss they've ever had. And the other half? They think HR should make him stop texting after 9 at night. So which group are you in? She thought about it for a second. Depends what day you ask. That answer stayed with me. Not because it sounded suspicious, because it sounded honest. For the first time since our anniversary dinner, I started thinking maybe I'd gotten the whole thing wrong. Maybe Daniel was just Daniel. A guy who honestly didn't understand professional boundaries. Not every uncomfortable situation had to mean an affair. I held on to that thought for almost 3 weeks. Then the finance dinner happened. Rachel texted me a little after 4 that afternoon. Running late? Finance review? Don't wait for dinner. I sent back a thumbs up and went on with my day. Around 7, I stopped at Home Depot to grab a few bags of mulch. I was loading them into my truck when somebody called my name. Ethan? I turned around. Daniel. He was carrying 2 hanging flower baskets. Didn't expect to see you here. Spring cleanup. He lifted the baskets with a grin. My wife says the front porch looks depressing. We talked for a couple of minutes. Nothing unusual. He asked how school was going. I asked how the product launch was coming along. Then he checked his watch. Crap. You okay? I'm already late. For the finance dinner, He blinked. What finance dinner? The one Rachel's at. His forehead creased for just a second. Oh. Then he laughed. No, that's tomorrow. I tightened my grip on the shopping cart. Tomorrow? Yeah. He shifted the flower baskets in his hands. Tonight I'm taking my wife out. He smiled. And if I show up without these, she'll probably kill me. He nodded toward my truck. Good seeing you. You too. Then he walked away. I stood there watching him load the flowers into his SUV. Maybe Rachel mixed up the dates. People do that. Maybe finance rescheduled something. That happens too. There were plenty of perfectly innocent explanations, but for the first time, I had something concrete, not proof. Just something that didn't fit. When I got home, Rachel's car still wasn't in the driveway. I looked at the clock. 7:42. Without really thinking about it, I opened the refrigerator. There was leftover pasta. I wasn't hungry. I just needed something to keep my hands busy. Rachel got home a little after 9. She looked completely worn out. How'd dinner go? I asked. She stopped in the entryway. What dinner? My stomach tightened. The finance review. She stared at me. Then her eyes got wide. Oh. She laughed and rubbed her forehead. I'm losing my mind. That was tomorrow. So, where were you tonight? She didn't answer right away. For a second, she looked genuinely confused. Then she held up her security badge. I've been at the office since 6. The elevators kept shutting down because they were testing the fire alarms. She shook her head. I honestly can't remember what day it is anymore. She walked over, kissed me, and smiled. I'm sorry. I nodded. So am I. She headed upstairs to change. I stayed in the kitchen. Half of me believed her immediately. The other half remembered Daniel saying exactly the same thing. Tomorrow. For the first time, I wasn't wondering if Rachel had lied. I was wondering why two people who work together every day remembered the same meeting differently. The next morning, I woke up feeling embarrassed. Rachel had already left for work. Before she walked out, she'd kissed my forehead and whispered, "Don't forget it's parent conference night." That was Rachel. Always remembering the little things I'd forget. I stood in the kitchen making coffee, replaying the conversation from the night before. Maybe she'd simply mixed up two meetings. God knows I'd done the same thing. Once I'd shown up to school convinced it was Friday. Turns out it was Thursday. I still had 4 classes left before the weekend. People get tired. People forget things. That should have been enough. Around 10 that morning, while my sophomores worked through a Civil War source packet, my phone buzzed. Rachel? You were right. Finance dinner is tonight. I checked my calendar after I got in. My brain is officially broken. I smiled. Mine too. Good luck. A second later, she sent back a thumbs up. That should have settled everything. Instead, something about the timing stuck with me. Not because she'd corrected herself, because she'd corrected herself after she got to work. She'd actually checked. Again, there wasn't anything suspicious about that. I hated that my brain kept turning completely normal moments into possible clues. That evening, she really did have dinner with finance. This time, she told me exactly where they were going before she left, and complained about it. If I have to eat one more $18 chicken breast while people argue about advertising budgets, I'm going to lose my mind. What restaurant? The Foundry. I laughed. I expected somewhere fancier. Finance people don't believe in fun. She smiled, grabbed her purse, and headed for the door. Don't wait up. I won't. After she left, I ordered pizza and watched baseball. Around 9:30, my phone buzzed. Rachel had sent me a picture of the dessert menu. Everything here tastes like expense reports. I laughed out loud. That text felt normal. Exactly like something Rachel would send. Exactly like something somebody having an affair probably wouldn't bother sending. When she got home, she spent 10 straight minutes making fun of one of the finance directors who somehow managed to compare every marketing decision to buying tractor parts. By the time we went to bed, I was convinced I'd let my imagination get away from me. Then Friday happened. Rachel looked up from her coffee and said, "Want to meet me downtown after work?" "I've got one last meeting. If you're nearby afterward, we can grab dinner." "Sounds good." School let out a little before 4. I drove downtown, parked outside her office building, and texted her that I'd arrived. No answer. 5 minutes, 10, 15. Finally, my phone rang. "Hey, you almost done?" There was a pause. "I'm actually across the street." I looked up. Across from her office was a coffee shop with giant floor-to-ceiling windows. "I don't see you." "I'm not at the coffee shop." Another pause. "The other side." I turned around. There wasn't another coffee shop, just a bank, a pharmacy, and the entrance to an underground parking garage. "You mean by the garage?" "Yeah." "I'm walking over." I crossed the street. She wasn't there. I checked my phone. The call had dropped. A minute later, it rang again. "I'm so sorry." "What happened?" "I thought you meant next Friday." I blinked. "What?" "I've got the meeting now, but I thought dinner was next week." For a second, we both just stood there. Then we started laughing. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. "Okay," I said. "I'll just head home." "I really am sorry." "I know." After we hung up, I stood on the sidewalk trying to remember who'd mixed up the dates. Her? Me? Both of us. It suddenly hit me that somewhere along the way, we'd turned into two people managing calendars instead of actually talking. I made it halfway back to my truck before I noticed Daniel. He was standing outside the office building talking to two women wearing company badges. A few seconds later, Rachel walked out carrying her laptop bag. Daniel said something. Rachel laughed. One of the women rolled her eyes and started toward the parking garage. Daniel caught up with them. All four of them disappeared together. I stood there another minute. There it was again. Something completely ordinary. Exactly the kind of thing I'd been hoping to see. Rachel wasn't sneaking off with Daniel. She was leaving work with 3 coworkers. The problem was, I'd only seen the end of it. If I'd shown up 30 seconds later, I would have seen Rachel and Daniel walking out together. If I'd arrived 30 seconds earlier, I would have seen the whole group. The story depended entirely on timing. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about that. Not because I believed Rachel was cheating, because I realized how easy it is to misunderstand something when you only catch part of it. That should have changed everything. Instead, it led to another question. How many other things had I only seen pieces of? The following Tuesday, Rachel left for work before sunrise. She forgot her iPad on the kitchen table. I noticed it while I was pouring cereal. My first thought was to text her. Then I remembered she was probably already driving. I picked it up so I could take it upstairs in case she came back for it. The screen lit up. No password. Just the lock screen. A calendar notification filled the display. Executive Review, Mercer/Ellis/Carter. 8 a.m. Mercer. Daniel. Ellis. A name I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have. The front door flew open. I knew I forgot something. Rachel stopped when she saw the iPad in my hands. Thanks. She took it, kissed me quickly, then turned back toward the driveway. Halfway out the door, she stopped. Oh. What? If you ever need to use it. She smiled awkwardly. Don't, I laughed. That sounded way more dramatic than you meant. It has confidential files. She shrugged apologetically. I could lose my job. I know. I just wanted to say it. The door closed behind her. I stood there alone in the kitchen. A normal husband would have gone to work. Instead, I logged into our shared phone account. Not because I thought I was going to find proof of an affair, because somewhere between that restaurant window and the forgotten iPad, I'd stopped looking for reassurance. I was looking for certainty. The phone records weren't dramatic. Honestly, that was almost disappointing. No secret phone numbers, no late-night marathon conversations, no mysterious contact saved under a fake name. Just pages of timestamps. Most of Rachel's calls with Daniel lasted 2 or 3 minutes. A handful stretched to 15. Almost everyone happened during business hours. The longest calls were usually on Mondays. The shortest ones happened late at night. Without even thinking about it, I grabbed a legal pad and started making notes. Monday, budget meeting. Thursday, product review. Sunday, 11-minute call. I stared at the page. What are you doing? The words slipped out before I realized I'd said them out loud. I shut the laptop, ripped the page off the legal pad, dropped it into the trash. Then, for reasons I still can't fully explain, I reached into the trash, pulled it back out, and smoothed the paper flat. I told myself I wasn't spying, I was organizing information. There was a difference. At least there was in my head. About a week later, Rachel surprised me. Want to grab lunch? That almost never happened anymore. I've got 45 minutes, she said. There's a deli downstairs. I can make that work. When I got there, she was already standing outside her building. Before I could even say hello, somebody called her name. Carter. Daniel. He crossed the sidewalk carrying 2 coffees. Perfect timing. He handed one to Rachel. Brought you the wrong order again. She peeked inside the cup. Vanilla? I know. You've worked with me for 4 years. I still have hope you'll eventually develop better taste. Rachel laughed. You say that every time. Then Daniel spotted me. Ethan. He reached out and shook my hand. Good to see you. You too. He looked back and forth between us. I was just stealing your wife for 10 minutes. Rachel pointed a finger at him. That's exactly the kind of sentence HR hates. Daniel grinned. They already hate me. One of the receptionists happened to be walking outside and overheard him. They don't hate you. She smiled. They're just exhausted. Daniel put a hand to his chest. I'm delightful. You answer emails at midnight. That inspiration doesn't wear a watch. She rolled her eyes and kept walking. Rachel looked at me. You see what I deal with? I nodded. I think I'm starting to. Daniel checked his watch. I've got to run. He turned toward the building, then stopped. Oh. He pointed at Rachel. Thursday night. I know. Don't cancel on me. I'm not. Then he disappeared inside. I watched him go. Rachel picked up her sandwich. What? He really doesn't have any boundaries. I've been trying to tell you. She sounded amused more than anything. I've watched him invite interns to Saturday breakfast meetings. He schedules calls during kids' soccer games. He once called legal from somebody else's wedding. She shook her head. The man's allergic to normal work hours. We sat outside eating lunch. For the first time, Daniel felt like a real person instead of this shadow hanging over my marriage. He wasn't flirting, he wasn't sneaking around, he was just too much. Everything about him spilled over into everybody else's life. It made me feel better. For about 3 days. Thursday afternoon, Rachel texted me. Running late. Dinner with Daniel before tomorrow's executive review. I stared at the message. No vague explanation. No excuse. She'd told me exactly where she was going. That should have been enough. Instead, another thought crept in. Maybe she's only telling you now because you've started paying attention. I actually laughed. Out loud. One of the teachers walking past my classroom looked in. You okay? I think so. You don't sound very sure. I'm arguing with myself. He nodded. Well, let me know who wins. Rachel got home a little before 10. The second she walked through the door, she kicked off her shoes and let out a long sigh. I'm never eating steak again. Tough meeting? She dropped onto the couch. The meeting was fine. The restaurant was so loud, Daniel practically had to yell the whole time. She rubbed her temples. I swear executives think the more expensive a restaurant is, the quieter it's supposed to be. So how'd tomorrow's presentation go? She looked at me. It's tomorrow. I blinked. Right. My mistake. She smiled. You've been teaching all day. You're a loud one. Then she leaned her head against my shoulder. I could have asked her about Daniel, about the dinner, about everything. Instead, we watched half an episode of some detective show before she fell asleep beside me. At one point, her phone buzzed. She didn't even move. I glanced at the screen. Daniel, don't forget the revised numbers. That was it. I turned the phone face down so the light wouldn't wake her. Then I caught myself. 6 months earlier, I never would have looked at the notification. Now I was reading message previews without even thinking. The line had moved, and every time it moved, it felt a little more normal. Saturday morning, my sister Megan showed up with coffee. She took one look at me and frowned. You look terrible. Good morning to you too. She laughed and sat across from me at the kitchen island. So what's going on? Nothing. Ethan? I'm just tired. She stirred cream into her coffee. Is this about Rachel working all the time? I hesitated. A little. She watched me for a second. Or is it about something else? I looked toward the living room. Rachel had already left for another strategy meeting. I saw her having dinner with her boss a while back. Megan didn't interrupt. And? I don't know. I don't think it was just dinner. You don't think? I saw them together. She nodded. And? They never mentioned it afterward. She waited. I ended up telling her about the restaurant. Not every detail, just enough. When I finished, she stayed quiet for a long moment. Then she asked something I'd somehow managed to avoid asking myself. Have you actually asked Rachel why she never mentioned it? No. Why not? I don't know. She gave me a look. No. You do. I rubbed the back of my neck. I guess. I sighed. I'm afraid she'll think I don't trust her. Megan nodded slowly. So instead, she glanced around the kitchen. You're doing what? I didn't answer, because I honestly wasn't sure anymore. Was I protecting my marriage? Looking for the truth? Or was I feeding a story I'd already started believing? Before she left, Megan stopped at the front door. You remember Dad? I looked up. Of course I did. When I was 16, Mom had an affair. Dad ignored every warning sign because he couldn't imagine she'd lie to him. By the time he admitted something was wrong, their marriage was already over. Megan leaned against the doorway. You've spent half your life trying not to become Dad. I know. She looked at me for another second. Just make sure you don't turn into somebody else instead. After she left, I stood in the kitchen thinking about that. Then my phone buzzed. It wasn't Rachel. It wasn't Daniel. It was an email. The subject line made my stomach tighten. Hawthorne Investigative Group. Free confidential consultation. I didn't remember staying on their website long enough for them to have my information. Then I remembered. About a week earlier, I'd filled out the contact form. I thought I'd closed the page before submitting it. Apparently, I hadn't. I deleted the email, then emptied my trash folder. That should have been the end of it. Instead, I spent the rest of the weekend wondering how much information I'd accidentally sent. My name, phone number, email address, maybe nothing else. It shouldn't have mattered. Unless I decided to call. Monday came and went. Then Tuesday. Every morning I'd wake up determined to talk to Rachel. Every night I'd find another reason to wait. She looked exhausted. She'd had a rough day. Dinner wasn't the right time. Maybe after the product launch. Maybe this weekend. There was always another excuse. By Thursday, something finally hit me. I wasn't putting off the conversation because I thought Rachel would lie. I was putting it off because I wasn't sure I'd believe her if she told me the truth. That thought stayed with me all day. Friday afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number, I almost let it go to voicemail. Ethan Carter? Speaking. This is Frank Hawthorne. I recognized the name immediately. You reached out through our website last week. I glanced toward my classroom door to make sure my students were gone. Right. I figured I'd follow up. I don't think I need... Good. He cut me off. There wasn't a trace of salesmanship in his voice. In my experience, people who don't need me usually have better marriages. I couldn't help laughing. That's one way to advertise. I'm not advertising. He paused. But if you ever want to talk before making a bad decision, the consultation's free. Before I could stop myself, I heard the words come out. How late are you open? His office was about 20 minutes from school. It wasn't what I expected. No walls covered with surveillance photos. No detective movie atmosphere. Just 2 chairs, a couple of filing cabinets, and a coffee maker that looked older than I was. Frank looked exactly like I'd imagined. Gray hair, pressed blue shirt, reading glasses. He looked like somebody's grandfather, the kind who happened to investigate insurance fraud for a living. He shook my hand. Tell me why you're here? So I did. The restaurant, the promotion, the late dinners, the phone calls. Daniel? The forgotten meeting dates, the confidential folders, everything. I expected him to interrupt. He never did. When I finally stopped talking, he folded his hands. Okay, I frowned. Okay? Let's separate facts from conclusions. He picked up a pen. You saw your wife having dinner with her boss. Yes. Fact. He wrote something down. She didn't mention it later. Right. Also a fact. Another note. You believe she intentionally hid it? I nodded. He looked up. That's a conclusion. It seems reasonable. It might be. He underlined something on the page. Or she simply didn't think it mattered. Then we moved to the next point. Late night phone calls. Fact. You believe they're emotionally involved. I didn't say that. You've thought it. I looked away. That's still a conclusion. For almost 40 minutes, he did the same thing. Every suspicion I had got divided into 2 columns. Facts, interpretations. When he finished, the facts barely covered half a page. The interpretations filled almost 3. Frank slid the legal pad across the desk. Interesting. I stared at it. Everything suddenly looked smaller, less convincing. He leaned back. Ethan. Yeah? I'm going to tell you something most private investigators never say. I looked up. I hope you never hire me. That caught me completely off guard. I stared at him. What? Because if you're sitting in my office instead of talking to your wife... He shrugged. Then your biggest problem probably isn't evidence. I rubbed my forehead. So you think I'm making this all up? I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? I'm saying I don't know. He tapped the legal pad. And neither do you. I sat there without saying anything. Frank got up, poured himself another cup of coffee, and leaned against the counter. Can I ask you something? Sure. What happens if I follow your wife for 2 weeks? He took a sip. And I don't find a single thing? I'd be relieved. He watched me for a moment. You answered that a little too fast. I frowned. What do you mean? You want to feel relieved. He nodded toward the notepad. But after everything you've told me, he let the sentence hang for a second. I'm not convinced you'd actually believe me. The room went quiet because I wasn't sure he was wrong. He set his mug down. So here's my advice. I waited. Go home. Talk to Rachel. If you still think you need me after that. He slid his business card across the desk. Give me a call. I made it all the way home before I lost my nerve. Rachel was already there. She was sitting at the dining room table surrounded by binders and color-coded sticky notes. She looked up and smiled. Hey. Hey. I've got about 30 minutes before another conference call. She rubbed her eyes. Then I'm all yours. There it was, the opening I'd been waiting for. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, ran through the words one more time. Rachel, I saw you with Daniel on our anniversary. Simple, honest. Instead, I walked back into the dining room and asked, Busy? She laughed, terrified. What happened? The executive review got moved up. She pointed at one of the binders. I've got one shot at this. I looked down. The binder wasn't completely closed. A sheet of paper was sticking out. Across the top, I could clearly read, Regional Executive Candidate Rachel noticed where I was looking. Without saying a word, she closed the binder. Not quickly, not guiltily, just carefully. Then she looked back at me. I wish I could tell you. That hit me harder than if she'd tried to hide it, because I believed her. For the first time, I could actually see how trapped she was. Something important was happening, something she genuinely couldn't talk about. I wanted to ask about the title. I wanted to ask about Daniel. I wanted to ask about the anniversary dinner. Instead, I said, Good luck tomorrow. She smiled. Thanks. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It's Daniel. I figured. She answered without leaving the room. Hey. She listened for a few seconds. No. Another pause. I'll be there in 20. She hung up. What happened? I asked. The printer on the executive floor died. I laughed. That's the emergency? You'd be amazed how often million-dollar decisions get delayed because somebody forgot to order toner. She stood up. I've got to go. I walked her to the front door. She kissed me. I'll try not to be late. You don't have to. She smiled. I know. Then she drove away. I stood in the driveway watching her car disappear. After a minute, I reached into my wallet. Frank's business card was still there. He'd been right. I just had the perfect chance to ask the only question that mattered, and I hadn't done it. I looked down at the card one more time. Then I made the call. Frank? It's Ethan. There was a pause. I was hoping I wouldn't hear from you. So was I. I need to hire you. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he sighed. All right. I'll take the case. But before we start, yeah? I need you to understand something. What? No matter what we find. He spoke slowly, choosing every word. After tomorrow, you don't get to go back to not knowing. I looked down the empty street where Rachel's car had disappeared. I know. The truth was, I wasn't nearly as sure of that as I sounded. To be continued in the next video.